So our text today is from the opening section of the Gospel of Mark. And Mark is a short gospel in more ways than one. In terms of size, it's the smallest gospel, and when looking how Mark lays out his stories, the episodes are shorter. It's just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. There's not a lot of padding. And also, an important note, Mark does not have any birth stories, any Jesus birth stories. There's no angels or shepherds like there are in Luke. There's no wise men like there are in Matthew. And there's no eternal presence with God like there is in John. So this introductory passage is very compact, but if we look at it a little deeper, there's a rich context that informs what's being said there. Mark believes that Jesus is this liberating king, the one who's sent from God. And this concept of one who will come in the name of God to make right the world and restore a time of peace and prosperity is found in many of the prophecies in the Hebrew Bible, and most notably Isaiah. It says right in there the words of Isaiah. The golden age coming about is kind of this precondition for God being in God's temple again, and of life going back to the wonderful times which they remembered. And so to Jesus' followers, he is God with us. That's that golden age. God is with us, and the kingdom of God is amongst us. But in that first century, there was also this other guy who was really important. In fact, Josephus spends a lot more time talking about John the Baptist as a historian than he does about Jesus. And Jesus was baptized by John, and so to the followers of Jesus, this is kind of an embarrassment in a way, because if Jesus is God with us, bringing about the kingdom of God, how do you explain this connection to John that he has? And so we get this idea in Mark that John is this precursor to Jesus, the one who prepares the way of Jesus. He's like the Elijah figure in Jewish tradition. Before the Messiah could come, Elijah had to come back. And so John is described as wearing camel hair like Elijah did, and of eating locusts and wild honey, and having a very sort of sparse existence, much like Elijah. So Mark is saying John the Baptist is like Elijah, and Jesus is our Messiah. So he quotes from Isaiah, and although this section contains material from other books in the Bible too, it is only attributed to Isaiah. And it says, "See, I'm sending a messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, the one with a voice crying in the wilderness." It comes from Isaiah chapter 40. And it's such a well-known text because it's one of the most beautiful arias in Handel's Messiah. Now I'm going to sing just like Tony. You'll remember it. Comfort ye, my people. You know that one, right? I won't do the whole thing. Yeah, that would be a little presumptuous to have you sit here while I indulge myself. But the comfort to Israel is coming to a time after exile in Babylon. So in the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, Isaiah makes clear that the people have turned away from God, and as a result, God is punishing them by letting them being taken into exile, by invaders coming into their land, by the temple being destroyed, all those things. And first Isaiah, the guy who wrote, or the people who wrote the first 39 chapters, is really clear. It's your fault. It's your mistake. You should never have turned from God. And if you hadn't, all would have been well. But you did, and so now you're suffering. That's a good message, eh? Especially at Christmas. But then there's this chapter 40. We call that second Isaiah. So there's a school of scholars that are writing like 150 years later, I think, who are saying, okay, wait a second. There's another side to this story. And second Isaiah imagines God convening this special heavenly council, and then once again telling the angels to comfort the people of God and to make straight in the desert a highway for God. And so the significance of this highway, because we sing about it all the time, make straight this highway in the desert, and I always think, so what? But in Babylonian tradition, they had all these roads that they had created for festive processions for their gods. And so in that tradition, there's like, okay, well, you got highways, but wait till you see the highway we're going to build for our God as he comes. And so this preparing the way of the Lord means this wonderful highway that goes through the desert right from Babylon back to Judea, where they will once again be with God and where they will be comforted and all will be well. And so here John the Baptist is the one who's crying in the wilderness, saying these words, "Prepare the way of the Lord. Make the path to peace with God straight, and return to the ways of the covenant that God has made with God's people." So what is interesting about John's strategy is that he baptizes for the repentance of sins. People come to him to become clean, to become whole. And it's this act by an individual that will somehow restore the people to God, right? So this connection between personal faithfulness and God's work in the world continues on in Jesus' ministry. And though the gospel writers often talk about Israel as a whole or the people of God, it always begins with a changed heart. It always begins with people, individuals who are called to follow the way of God. And that's an interesting concept to me as we consider this idea of John and his call, "Prepare the way of the Lord," along with this candle that we lit today for peace. Because when we talk about peace, we often think of sort of our communal space where war is no more and prosperity and plenty are part of everyday life. Preparing for that space is not just a political thing for leaders to accomplish. Thinking about it, the possibility of peace in the world begins with peace in the hearts of individuals who are called to seek a better way. And I kind of must admit, I was thinking about these concepts all week, and I was trying to figure out how I'm going to illustrate this. What's the connection between war and peace and the human heart? How do we prepare the way of the Lord in our lives so that peace is possible? And I'm mulling these things even last night. I'm in bed, not sleeping, thinking what to say. And then I got up this morning and started reading my online news, and there were 3 stories that really struck me, and I want to share them with you as a way to illustrate this. And the first is the story of the war on Christmas, right? We're lighting the candle for peace, we have to talk about war. For some people, the war is raging at the moment. They believe that happy holidays is somehow an assault on the foundation of the Christian holiday of Christmas. I've, over the years, received many of those emails that probably all you have too. Maybe some of you have sent that, and God bless you, that's okay. But they're indignant that people don't say Merry Christmas anymore. Because apparently the pervasive presence of the holiday in every store and street and Santa's workshop in every shopping mall and parties held by every business are not sufficient enough to ensure that Christmas will survive. We have to say Merry Christmas too, and make sure it's called a Christmas tree instead of a holiday tree, and that Starbucks has a coffee cup sufficiently Christmassy, not good enough a red and green cup without any words or imagery. Thus is the war on Christmas. And I'm sure those who perpetuate this sense of indignation at the diminishing of the Christian holiday believe their words are preparing the way for the Lord. But I'll let this priest I ran across this week explain why maybe this is not the case.
I don't think Jesus would care much about whether we say Merry Christmas. I don't like the concept of a war on Christmas.
War on Christmas, the war on Christmas.
This debate over whether we say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, whether we have a Christmas party or holiday party, that debate sometimes can be a distraction.
It's the December debate, Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. Which do you say, and why?
I'm Kevin O'Brien. I'm Dean of the Jesuit School of Theology at Santa Clara University. I don't think Jesus would care much about whether we say Merry Christmas or not, because he was not concerned about promoting himself, but promoting what he called the reign of God. This reign, this community of justice, peace, and love. That to him was more important than any title for himself. Secondly, more important than just saying Merry Christmas is to live it. That is, to live as Jesus did, to live a life of simplicity, a life of generosity, a life of service, a life of welcome and hospitality to others. And that's the conversation we should be having. It should not be about litmus tests, about whether I say Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas. To me, that's an easy way out to prove your Christianity. And lastly, we have to be careful about the language we use in a pluralistic society like ourselves, because in it we encounter people of different faith traditions. Pope Francis will often speak about a culture of encounter, not confrontation. And this means listening to people and respecting people who are different than us. We listen to them not just simply to be nice, but to learn. He also said, whenever we encounter another person in love, we learn something new about God. Now, Christians, like any people of faith, need to defend their right to practice their faith in our society. But it's just not about promoting or protecting Christians. If I'm to be called Christian or a good citizen, I need to be as protective of the rights of Muslims, for instance, in this country to practice their faith. I need to be as vigilant to protect their rights and their communities as I do my Christian community. So to everyone this year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, peace to all.
As I was considering this war on Christmas motif, I was wondering how it related to the idea of peace. And I came across an article explaining a Pew Research poll, I think they do it every year, that was taken about people's feelings about the words Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And so the Huffington Post headline puts it this way: Donald Trump has not convinced America there's a war on Christmas, and in brackets, but if there were, Christmas would be winning. So within this story are the results of the poll, which show that only 34% believe the holiday is under attack at all. And of that group who thought there was a war on Christmas, 44% to 29% believed Christmas was winning. And the article says the vast majority of Americans are pretty much fine with whatever version of seasonal greetings you'd like to offer, although most do have a preference. But only 11% say they'd be offended to hear a different greeting. And I wonder what is in the hearts of those sometimes who insist on Merry Christmas over Happy Holidays. And I can't know, but I kind of think there's some sense of loss. Some sense of loss of the days gone by that might prompt those feelings. Perhaps it's the increasing visibility of other religions and religious holidays that makes them feel insecure of their holiday in our culture. Or maybe it's a fear that Christianity will somehow disappear and that we must be vigilant to ensure it survives. But whatever the reason, I don't get a feeling of peace when I hear someone say we're going to take Christmas back. I don't see how the argument contributes to preparing the way for Jesus in this time of Advent. And then the second article I ran across was in the New York Times, and it was a story of life in Jerusalem, which is a real war zone if we're talking about war and peace, and especially this week, because as you know, with the American president's designation of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, there is lots of uprising at this place, and Jerusalem and other places are dangerous at the moment. So this article gives an account of the daily life of Arabs and Jewish people who live in the city, and how the hostilities between them, which simmer all the time, eat at their peace of mind and emerge into interpersonal bursts of impatience and hostility. So the author cites the honking of horns after you've only been at the 2 seconds with a green light, or young schoolgirls who are gesturing at motorists as they step into crosswalks because they don't stop fast enough, and crowded apartment buildings where families are living together because there's not enough space, and all these are part of a really tense cityscape. The author notes that people refer to the others all the time as the Arabs and the Jews. And the article says, the day in, day out friction can be draining. And when the conflict bubbles up, even natives can question why they persist. One resident said, "You feel like you're living in jail here. The people are so tense, and you feel yourself separated. You have to be with either the Israeli community or the Arab community. There's no difference. We're one country, but it's Israeli Arabs or Palestinians or Israeli Jews. The article goes on to speak of a light rail transit system that's been built that should be a gift to all the people because it goes through Arab and Jewish places in Jerusalem, but it isn't used as much by Arabs because it's seen as this symbol of Israeli occupation. And the story goes on and on about the tension in their lives and how it affects their relationships with each other and how they are always on the brink of hostility, even though many of them know people from the other communities. And I know there are those on both sides or all sides of this issue who think they're preparing the way of the Lord. They are justified in continuing this war until one side wins. And I'm not suggesting that all that is needed is a kumbaya moment, because that would be naive. But there's something about inner peace, being right with yourself, that allows you to see the world around you with more grace. It gives you a distance that takes you out of the tensions of the everyday, and I can't help but think that if I were living in Jerusalem, seeking that peace would be a first priority. Peace in my life for the existence of the day. And then the third story I read was about an unlikely friendship. There's an online game called Words with Friends. Maybe some of you play it. It's a kind of Scrabble you play with anyone else who happens to be online. And an unlikely friendship started between truly different people who were playing this game together. One is a 22-year-old African American who had moved to New York to pursue a music career, and the other was an 81-year-old woman living in a retirement community in Florida. So it began with casual chats. When you're in an online game, you can talk to other people who are playing. Doesn't matter where they are in the world. My son has friends in California that he met playing a game online. It's a truly interesting way of forming community. So they started with these little chats. And then Spencer, who is the African American, started saying that his best friend was an 81-year-old white woman in Florida, and he tweeted this out. And a minister from Riverside Church in Manhattan, Amy Butler, who I heard at the preaching festival, she's very articulate and well-known, but she heard this story and saw it tweeted, and she decided that they should meet. And so she flew with the young man to meet his friend in Florida. And of their meeting, he said, "When I met her, it was so natural. It wasn't like anything spectacular or different than you speaking to one of your friends." And I can't help but think this relationship was possible because their hearts were open to peace. These are the ones, for me, of these three stories who truly understood this idea: prepare the way of the Lord. Prepare the way of the Lord, not just in our culture and broadly, but in our hearts. And so this Advent season, as we are waiting for the coming of the Christ in the form of this helpless, helpless child, our first job is not to try and fix the world, as important as that is. Our task is really to transform our own hearts and to seek love and grace and to let go of grievances and to open up our lives to unexpected peace that's waiting to fill the space we make for the way of God. May it be so. Amen.